Today we've got Ulrika Schied, and we're very happy to welcome her. Ulrika is a professor and director of the Japan Forum for Innovation and Technology at UC San Diego School of Global Policy and Strategy. And she is one of the persons who has studied Japan as a business scene for more than 20 years now. And Ulrika also is the author of the Business Reinvention of Japan book, which offers a lot of insights about the Japanese corporations and how they reinvented themselves and repositioned themselves in the past decade. Also, Ulrika is the host of the weekly Japan Zoominar, and she's got different guests every Tuesday Pacific time, and then it is Wednesday morning here 8:30 in Japan. So if you go to her profile, you have a look. You can see what she's doing there, and also you can visit her website from the profile. Today we're going to talk about the globalization in Japan, how it compares, what are the challenges, what needs to change. And I'm very grateful once again for Ulrika agreeing to participate in this call today. Thank you very much, Ulrika. So, shall we start?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thank you, Maya, for this great introduction. And let's recall that this topic grew out of a clubhouse we had a few weeks ago, and there was sort of a thing about how can Japanese students apply to study abroad, and why don't they? And that then was mixed in with some other aspects of innovation. And so we're here today to discuss this because we thought it would be helpful to break some of the things that people talk about when they talk about globalization down into some of its components to get a clearer image. So I'm going to start by defining what I think when I talk about people being global or having a global mindset. And then I want to make 3 points that may be controversial, so I hope that we can have a good conversation about that. So first, let me begin with what's global. And the point I want to make there is that I would not want to define this as having to do with language. I don't even think it has anything to do with being able to assimilate. That's helpful and maybe necessary, but it's not sufficient. At least for the language part. I don't think assimilation is necessary even. So here's what I think when I talk about somebody who is a global citizen. I think of it as the ability to interact competently with people from other parts of the world. Let me say that again. So the ability to interact competently with people from other parts of the world. And the next step is what causes that ability or what allows that ability, and I think it has something to do with having a social radar for intercultural differences and the ability to navigate those differences, right? And so this radar then requires that we're curious, that we're interested, that we want to be exposed, and that we're happy to learn. So that's the working definition I want to use. We can come back to this later if you don't like this definition. But let me just take this definition, that is the ability to interact and the social radar to pick up cues. And so then I want to make 3 points. You know, when we do research about these things, we often think of people falling on a normal distribution. So. And then we say, okay, so how does the average Japanese compare to the average, let's say, American for now? We could also later bring in Europe because that's also interesting. But let's, for starters, just say, how does the average Japanese compare? And then we can also later, everyone, compare the tails of this distribution, that is the really dense people and the really open people. But so let's look at averages. And so I want to make 3 points. One, on average, the average Japanese is more global and curious globally than the average American. I just want to posit that. We can discuss. You can say true or false. But so, hypothesis number one: the average Japanese is actually very globally curious, and more so than the average American. The second point I want to make is that global is a big word, and we sometimes think of the Japanese to be a little bit not be good global athletes. They stick to their own behaviors and sometimes look awkward in a global setting. But if you look a little bit closer, what we'll see is that Japanese are actually pretty much at ease in Asia. So if you look at Japanese business in, say, Vietnam or Thailand or Indonesia, Japanese don't look awkward necessarily. Not more awkward than anybody else. Where it's more standing out and comes to bigger display is the East-West divide. Right? And so I know plenty of Japanese that do perfectly fine in Japan. They in the United States, they assimilate, they're curious, they're global citizens. But there are also some that aren't, right? And so that happens less often in Asia and more often when they come to the U.S. or Europe. But again, so for every global American I know, I can show you a global Japanese. So Americans don't change their behaviors and norms and what they think is right or wrong when they go abroad. Americans just accept the advantage that they speak the language. But other than that, they're not more global, more curious, or more adept at fitting in than the average Japanese business person. And then on the language, because this will come up, so I'll just make a point on the language. Of course, this is much, Japan is much maligned for not knowing how to speak English. I want to point out to you that that's a recent phenomenon. That those of us that have been around long enough will remember the bubble economy years of the late 80s and early 90s, and language was not a problem. There was no sensitivity or no self-degradation, self-deprecation on the part of the Japanese that somehow English was a problem. It became a problem later, and I don't know quite why. But I still want to make the argument, going back to my first point, that on average, the Japanese are more multilingual than the average American. In fact, if we go to Europe, I would posit that the Japanese are no worse or no better than the French, who are, of course, notorious for not speaking any other languages. So let me stop here because I've made three points that hopefully we can discuss. So I define global as an ability to interact, and I argue that Japan is quite normal, if not above average. The average Japanese is, and that global is a tricky word because Europeans do really well in other European countries. Americans do pretty well with other Commonwealth countries, English speakers, but not elsewhere. And the Japanese do pretty well in Asia. So let me stop there and see what you think.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, I definitely, definitely agree with you. I mean, by the definition which you gave, in the beginning of this conversation and the points which you made. And it's really interesting because I can see it in my my field or my line of business. So it's travel and tourism. How much more adequate the Japanese who travel overseas are when they visit a country. So from the point that they always do their homework before going somewhere, they read a lot about the culture, the local customs. They're very careful not to be offensive when they're there or not to step on anybody's toes when they're there. So it's really, yes, I absolutely agree with you, but I believe that probably other people, have different points of view. So, Eric, I hear that you have opened your mic.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, I do like the definition that you used for global. So, I'd like to use that definition too. I know I agree with you that I think the average Japanese is more curious than the average American about other cultures. And I think that's because the average Japanese person has this feeling that in order to be happy and fulfilled, they do actually have to look outside of their own culture and country and understand what's out there. Whereas the average American doesn't feel that way. The average American feels like as long as I understand America, I can be happy and fulfilled. And as far as the ability to interact well with other cultures, I think the curiosity that's higher in Japan, it drives a slightly higher average ability. In America, you do have some real sort of, cultural polyglots who are very comfortable moving in and out of different cultures. They're usually, very well-traveled. They're usually more educated than the average person in America. But it's not a normal distribution, right? It's a distribution curve where the big fat part of the curve is way over to the left, and then it's very skewed so that the thin part of the distribution curve stretches quite far out to the right. So you do have a few people who are really global by your definition, and they're also usually very curious about other cultures. But yeah, on average, the average Japanese person does have more curiosity about what is going on in the world outside of my own country and my own culture.
So I think that's super interesting, Eric, because I was thinking about that when I prepared what I was going to say. So you just mentioned what I was trying to play with, which is that the distribution curve, or, you think of this as the tails, right? So how far it goes to the right and the left, that might actually be, the tails might be longer in the US. That is to say, there are more completely non-global people in the US that, because the US is completely self-sufficient. They don't need to know anything about Europe, or they think they don't need to.
That's the common perception, yeah.
Well, but then also on the other end of the true global players, there are more, where Japan is somehow... And I don't know why, but I mean, everybody who does business with Japan knows that there will come a point where the Japanese counterparty will be unwielding and not giving in to some sort of global way of doing things, right? Mm-hmm. And we know that. So where does that come from? And I'm not sure whether that's individual or whether that's institutional. Right, that they say, but our headquarters will do it this way, and therefore I have to represent what headquarters want, or are they really personally like that? I don't know. That maybe you're a good person to ask that question, actually.
I don't think it's personal. I think it is cultural. It may be institutional culture. Like people at Toshiba might just say, well, this is just how we do things here at Toshiba, and I know that if I escalate this issue far enough up the chain, someone at Toshiba headquarters will just take this position, and that's just how it is. And it might also be partly Japanese culture, deliberate or not. I think there is an acceptance that it is an okay thing, or maybe even a good thing, to take a very, very firm position on certain things and say, no, this is just how it will be done here. If it's not done that way, we don't accept it. And you do have that sort of attitude existing in the US as well on certain issues, just not as much in business. So you see it on social issues a lot, right? Like if you go to certain parts of the US and you say, this is my position on the right of a woman to access abortion services, like you will find really hardened positions, pro and against, depending on where you are. But then in business, it's almost like you are trained to be more flexible or more open to the idea that everything has to be negotiable. So I think culture of the country does play into it. I don't think it's a personal thing. I don't think that Japanese are just born with some gene or some tendency to adopt, non-negotiable positions.
No, of course not. But there's a lot of research in social psychology on what's called the social radar, which is my translation also for the Japanese term KY, Kuki o Yomeru,
right.
Yomenai. It's usually used in the negative, right? So somebody can't read the air. And the social radar is something that is also, it might be partially innate, but it's trained. It is a sensitivity to how your behaviors are perceived by others and how sensitive you are. And every person is sensitive to a certain degree. That's called social proofing. We always want to do something that makes us fit in and look like the others. And so there's a ton of research showing this, right? So, and then that has nothing to do with Japan. That's just a human thing. Yeah. And so, and in fact, on average, it's also been shown that Japanese often have a much more sensitive social radar only because it matters so much in Japan that we fit in, right? If you stick out, you get hit on the head. So kids learn early on to make sure that their behavior does not ruffle feathers and that they're not become a meiwaku, and that's a trained thing. But what we do see in business, I think, often we know is that there's a certain it's often complicated, right? Things are more complicated than they need to be. And I like your point that American business people are trained to get things done more than to insist on a certain process how to get it done. There's more of an emphasis on on the outcome. Let's get this done, and not so much maybe on the process in terms of what's the right order to speak or in what order things have to be done. That's very interesting that you agree with that.
On the personal versus institutional point, just based on my experience, I worked with hundreds of Japanese companies in the U.S. over the last 20 years. And one of the biggest issues with the local Americans and even with the Japanese who were assigned to these subsidiaries was that so many decisions were being made from the head office. And the Japanese Chuzai lamented because they were stuck between a rock and a hard place. Like they understood, they were on the ground, they understood what was going on, but they kind of had to follow the marching orders from the main office, and it created this tremendous amount of pressure because they had to deal with their local American staff who were obviously complaining. And the head office that was issuing these edicts, and the Japanese would often complain, they don't know what's going on here, but we don't have much of a choice. So certainly on the personal level, I found the Japanese very open. They were earnest in wanting to adapt, but in many ways their hands were tied. They weren't given proper training on culture, which is why I had a job there, because I was kind of the guy to go back and fill in the gaps for them. So but as what you said about Americans, I completely agree with everything you said. I think it's a wide bell curve in America, but generally speaking, I don't think that Americans are the most global-minded people. And of course, there are.
Yes, I find that interesting. And Ulrika and Tim, what you just said about the comparison between the Japanese and the Americans, it's really interesting to me. And I wonder. So I would also invite Tomoko-san to share her thoughts on this later. But because Tim, you said that the Americans are much more keen, on getting things done, so they don't care that much about the process, right? So, and I wonder whether that has something to do, with going or having a look at the bigger picture, whether that has something to do, with the social responsibility of the company, and how, because the process in Japan is so important. And so, of course, people stick to it, which is, and basically they're trying to make what's that, fokpa. So they try not to make any mistakes in the process, before they actually achieve the results. So it seems to me that there is a lot of there is more responsibility here, which translates probably in social responsibility, and how companies actually care, how their image is projected, and what the society thinks about them, and so on. And also, to the second point, about a lot of Japanese people who work overseas, they quite often complain about, not being able to act more independently, because the headquarters actually has, they have that established processes and so on. So here comes, I think, the question about localization, while we are trying to globalize. And the other day, Tomoko and we talked about this. And so, Tomoko-san, what do you think about that? I think that you've got some very interesting thoughts about this.
Personally, I've been believing that the globalization is actually localization. Good localization is required to adapt it based on the local situation and local requirements. But however, not only Japanese companies, but also so-called global companies asking local offices, including the office in Tokyo, to adopt exactly the same policy and sales style as headquarters requires to do. That's what I've witnessed actually at when I've discussed with many medical representatives from pharmaceutical companies at site. The policies and sales talks and strategies are made by headquarters and enforced to all local offices globally, not only in Tokyo and in Japan, but also some other areas as well. And it didn't seem to be negotiable to adapt the local situation. So this is not the issue only for Japanese companies, but also the Americans or European companies. But thinking of the as a globalization, I do really believe that the accepting the differences depending on the local the countries, because every country is different. Japan is not exceptional. America is exceptional, and European countries are also exceptional based on the cultures and the tradition. So that I believe that all headquarters in Tokyo's or America's or have to understand that if they want to sell their products and want to be accepted, they also accept every country has different perspective, cultures, and traditions to see things. And if they manage to accept and do nicely about the localization, I think those companies would be accepted more easily than what they feel like they are not accepted. That's what I've seen. I'm just speaking.
Thank you. That's interesting. Yes, how yes, we are talking about globalization, and just as you said, well, actually headquarters, they need to acknowledge the fact that every country comes with its tradition, its culture, but it's also regulations, and those regulations are based also on the traditions and the business practices which have existed in that particular country for a long time. So, Evan, you have been, You have been working in the field of market entry to Japan. You have been helping companies to enter Japan here. So I guess that you have also had some, let's say, interesting observations about this.
Thank you, Maya. And thank you for the invitation to speak and for this opportunity. It's nice to see everybody virtually. So yes, I've been helping companies both enter the Japanese market and vice versa. I've helped some Japanese companies to expand overseas. So one thing that I think is very interesting and kind of shines a light on this issue is the research done by Geert Hofstede, a Dutch researcher, and maybe Ulrike, you can correct me on the pronunciation of his name if that's not right, but he's done some research into cultural dimensions, and he's created some indexes that are very revealing for understanding these cultural differences. So if we look at how Japan scores on some of the cultural dimension indexes, we can learn a lot. One in particular that I find interesting is what's called uncertainty avoidance. This is not the same as risk avoidance or risk aversion. It just means avoiding the uncertain. Culturally, of course, Japan, because it faces many natural disasters and many unknowns, it has developed a culture that would like to reduce the unknown, reduce the uncertainty, and it puts a great deal of emphasis on creating the correct structure and the correct processes for avoiding this uncertainty. If we compare Japan to the United States, the uncertainty avoidance index of Japan is 92. The United States is 46. So there's a considerable gap there. But I think it's also interesting to compare Japan to at least what is in my field of technology. It's in many ways closest competitor, which is Singapore. We're often experiencing a bit of a brain drain to Singapore, it seems, in the tech field. So although I agree with the point that Japan does well throughout Asia because of some of the manners and some Confucian cultural similarities. If we look at right now what's going on in the tech world, Singapore is doing extremely well. Singapore is booming, and their uncertainty avoidance index is 8. Now, again, Japan is 92, the United States is 46, and Singapore is 8. So if we look at the ability to engage in business overseas, to even do things like speak in a foreign language or interact with the rest of the world, if you have a very high uncertainty avoidance index, it's very likely that you're going to suffer in this area. You're going to face trouble. I think Japan did very well when interaction with the rest of the world during the bubble period was more certain. There was a simple goal. Let's focus on monozukuri. Japan makes good things. Let's focus on that, and then exporting these items overseas. And Ulrike, perhaps to your point, at that time, when there was a clear mission and the goal was certain and the procedures were very, very certain, I think Japanese people were much more comfortable interacting on the international stage. I would say that the shift from the industrial age to the information age has created a great deal of uncertainty because Japan is not yet comfortable interacting in this world. And I think that really shines a spotlight, so in summary, really shines a spotlight on these cultural issues that Japan is facing right now. And I'm done speaking.
Thank you for that. That's a great perspective as well. Ulrika, yes?
Yeah, could I just, so the Hofstede is how it's pronounced. He is actually Belgian. So the Hofstede study has had a huge impact on the field of international business research. It has triggered more than 250 PhD theses. It's clearly important, but we need to keep and you should use it for whatever purpose you can, and it helps you accomplish. But we should keep in mind that it's actually not particularly granular. What Professor Hofstede did was in the 1960s, he interviewed a couple hundred people that worked at IBM in the various locations of IBM around the world, and then he developed his 2x2 boxes. So uncertainty avoidance, masculinity, which is what it describes, but also there's a power index so the distance from in the hierarchy. And I'm actually blocking on the fourth one, but in any event, so there were a couple of these dimensions, and then countries were put on this spectrum. But we have to remember that these numbers were created in the 1960s, and I don't know what it means that Singapore has a low uncertainty avoidance thing. I would take that number with a grain of salt. But no matter. I mean, so it's a great model. The model that I like to use that gives me a sort of a benchmark in terms of assessing is a more recent study that gives us a little bit more granularity as we look across countries, and that is the concept of tight versus loose, which is another spectrum, right? So countries fall on go from 1 to 0 if you wish, or tight to loose, and the definition of tight is the agreement on the extent to which there is an agreement on what is the right behavior. So this is the right way of doing it or not. And the tolerance towards deviance. And Japan, together with Norway and Korea and in fact India, falls on the tight end of that spectrum. That is, people generally agree on the right behavior, the way to do certain things, the yarikata, right? This is how it's done. And they're pretty intolerant when people violate these rules. When we've all, everybody who's lived in Japan and made a mistake in sorting their garbage knows that there's very little tolerance towards not doing it the right way. And that, I think, has also great business implications. You can think about that as a way of also explaining certain behaviors, say in your field, say the software or so there's just very little flexibility, or using data-based marketing tools. There's very little flexibility to think outside the box because there's no one way of doing things, and as long as you're bound by that one way, you're unlikely to come up with creative solutions. So this is something that Japan will have to change. And I want to get back to Eric's point about the innate. I think it can't be underscored enough that culture is defined in these studies, whether that's the Hofstede study or the Galfin study on the tight-loose theory. Culture is defined as the behavioral norms in a certain setting. And so that could be your family has a certain family culture, your company has a certain corporate culture, your country has a certain country culture. But there's absolutely nothing in that that's innate. It can be changed, and it can be managed. You can change the culture of the company you work in or the team that you work with. You can change the culture of your book club. You can even change the culture of your family if you want to. And so I think it's very important that we get away from this research that was done in the 1980s that sort of made culture something that was born in, or that made Japan uniquely unique. We have a lot of research over the last 30 years that shows that that's really not the case.
Thank you for that. I would like to also invite Yuka to share her thoughts. Yuka, good morning. Thank you very much for coming.
Hey, thank you. So before I proceed with my question, I'm based in California, and it's 4:30 still, and I'm still working, so I may have to drop off before this club is over. So I just don't want to be, rude about that.
That's okay.
Okay, and then also, I missed the very beginning of this club. And by the way, I'm new to this club, so again, I don't know what's the protocol. But okay, I keep apologizing, but I apologize if I mispronounce your name. your name is Ulrike. How you pronounce that? Is that how you?
That's correct. Yeah,
Okay,
Ulrike.
thank you.
That's right.
Okay, cool. Okay, sorry. So, like I was saying that I missed the very beginning of the your introduction. So, what prompted you to research on globalization on Japan? The reason I'm asking is I think you touched on briefly somewhere. Isn't that based on necessity? I mean, like Japan, as everybody knows, there is no natural resources, the population is shrinking, and it's very much, like a manufacturing economy, not like an industrial, not like a software. They're kind of, behind. So what, prompts you to do the research to begin with?
Well, so my research is actually on Japanese business. And so, yeah, the necessity of being more global. I think you just answered it, right? So, it's an interesting phenomenon, but I don't study globalization per se. I mean that came from Maya wanting to to do this topic because it's so clear that if you want to compete, well, actually, let me rephrase this as a question to the group. You could actually tell a story that Japan has been incredibly successful, like Evan just said, incredibly successful in sticking with its way of doing things and become a global powerhouse economy, right? It's the third largest economy in the world, even though it is only the 12th largest country in the world. And so something is working, and there is, a lot of people think they know what Japaneseness is, right? Or the Japanese way of doing business. And so clearly Japan has made a mark and established some standards, just like America has, right? So America has written a lot of the behavioral rules and what we do in global business. And so that's very interesting. Why is that? And maybe it's great for Japan to stick with its own way of doing things because they've been incredibly successful. Why should they change? Why should they become more global? Why not just go out and do their global business the Japanese way? But that is Yuka, that's the discussion, right? So there's the discussion within Japan. I mean, this is all propagated also within Japan. That the Japanese themselves are saying, "Oh, we're not global enough, and we need a more global mindset, and we need to do this and that." And so we could actually have started this whole conversation by saying, well, is that really true? Maybe it's just fine to be Japanese and do global business.
Oh, okay. So I want to make sure that I understand what you just said. So, yes. So, okay. I'm sorry. Maybe my question was just too basic. So, yes, we all aware that, everybody has to be, globalized, but is it really necessary? Is that a sort of like the philosophical, or maybe I shouldn't use the word. Is that a topic of the today? I'm sorry. Am I messing things up?
Well, basically,
no. I don't think you're messing up anything. It's a very complicated thing. I mean, so let's. Let me see whether I can structure this a little better. So the fact is, the observation is that a lot of people in Japan are talking about the necessity for Japan to become more global. And there was an earlier club here where we talked about how universities aren't doing this and Japan is behind in its ability to, teach English in ways that help with business and so on and so on. So there is this talk, right? And we wanted to discuss this today, I guess, Maya. Wanted to raise this issue and what Japan can do to be more effective in its global business. And that's an open question. And I don't have the answers to this. I'm just, I was just laying out some ideas, but it's an interesting question whether Japan actually needs to change.
I'm Japanese, so, and then I love my own country. I'm very grateful what it has done for me. But looking from outside, it's very frustrating. That's why I've started to attend many clubhouse kind of, based on Japanese theme. To me, I like to think Japan got potential to grow, but it seems to me that it's not living up to its potential. That's why I like to learn more. What exactly the globalization that Japan should be embarking on. That's why my question can be very basic, but again, it just my motivation here is just I don't know learn. And what if you can do something to turn around that ship, which to me is kind of sinking.
Can I add a comment here?
Yes, please. Oh, I'm sorry. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Sorry about that. Okay.
Yeah. Is that all right then?
It's Maya's call, right? Okay, sorry. Yeah.
Yes, please do. Go ahead.
So, I first came to Japan in 1982, and I was doing cross-cultural training inside a Japanese entity for 4 years in the late 1980s. We were teaching Japanese how to cross-culturally adapt and accept differences and ways of getting things done. We were doing this way back in the days when Kokusaikai, internationalization, was the key hot theme. And so, I've gone through this. I've been in this country for 40 years. And my position is that Japan is internationalizing in spite of itself. So what I mean by that is no matter how many programs are done, Japanese are doing it on their own. And I'm not saying that there shouldn't be a systemic effort and there shouldn't be corporate and government efforts to help people understand there are different ways of getting things done. But I think my lesson from 40 years of doing it is the Japanese are doing it on their own, and they're doing it in spite of cross-cultural norms that really don't want change to happen. So I'm curious if anyone shares that view.
Thank you for that. Yes, Jason, yes.
You articulated what I joined the stage for, in that you can take the broad generalizations, of the train, generalizations of Japan and its avoidance of uncertainty, and you can dig it right down to the lowest level of corporate governance and hierarchical structure of Japanese companies, and not teaching English enough. But at the end of the day, maybe they're just slower. They are changing. You only have to look at the startup scene and the fact that there are many young Japanese people that simply are not afraid to go out and they want to start a startup. And I was on Ulrike's last webinar with Robert Ebhart, who also came up with some interesting concepts around that. Maybe they are changing, just in their own time, in their own way.
Well, the only thing which doesn't change is change, actually. So change is always here. And yes, as David said, David, thank you very much for that perspective. Well, I have seen it too. I have been here just only for 20 years, but David, as you said, the number of people, who are, well, let's say, Ulrika, you said that, of course, speaking another language is not an indicator of being global, but still, it, just it broadens your, let's say, points of view and gives you other perspectives as well. And I can see, that the number of people who speak different languages, other languages than Japanese, it's not only English, has increased. We see a lot of people who travel, well, they used to travel internationally. They will be traveling internationally again once the pandemic is over. So basically, all those experiences which people who travel and work overseas and they are gaining, they accumulate, and just as David said, so it's exactly what is happening. Change is here, it is going on, and we'll see more and more changes, even though some of the institutions and let's say there are of course some powers which are not very keen on let's say globalizing, but well, we're seeing that globalization is here. Of course there are challenges. And Tomoko, yes?
thanks to America, Japanese didn't need to spend so much budget for defense, so that Japanese companies and government could manage to focus on the economy and manufacturing. As a result, without changing their comfort zones, we could manage to have kind of Japanese kind of hegemony. And still, many older generation are living that particular environment of comfort zone. And because they are living in their own comfort zone, so that it's really hard them to change or realize the importance of the changes. I think that's the issue we need to really realize. And also, younger generation has been changing more and accepting global mindset, not only thinking about doing the business in Japan, but also doing the business globally. I think so things is changing, but most of the time I hear is that Japanese people don't speak English. The complaints from overseas people rather than people in Japan. And because the complaints from all over, that's why some Japanese feel like because they've been receiving so much complaints from non-Japanese people, so that they feel like they don't want to change it. But we need to come up to realize that we need to think like we are not living only in Japan, but we are living in global society, whether we like it or not. We have to accept that fact eventually. And some people, older generation as well, gradually try to understand that the institution like civil servants or politicians are still not that point yet. I think that's the issue. We need to do something.
Yes, thank you for that. Well, we have to accept the fact that there will be always, parts in the society who are pro-change and other parts, who are against change. So it is quite normal. It's not only in Japan. And of course, people don't like to be told, okay, you are not doing things right? So I believe that, yes, I have seen this in Japan. I believe that a lot of other people have seen it too. Like, people, let's say foreigners who come here, they expect things to move faster, to be more flexible. It doesn't happen, and that's where frustration builds up. And that frustration is probably the reason, for discontent on both sides, especially, on the side of the foreign investors. And well, I don't say that it is right, but it is understandable. Of course, this is something which can change. And this is something which, if it changes, will take time to change, of course. Well, so let's see, Kalon. I'm sorry if I mispronounce your name.
It's all good. Everybody does. I don't even know how you really say it at this point. But anyway, I was just chiming in a lot of really interesting ideas and perspectives. What Ulrich, I may have said your name wrong as well. I apologize. What Ulrich said was very, very insightful about just sort of the different mindsets of what is change and whether or not is a good thing if it is for everyone. I'm talking to you guys from Fukuoka, and I feel like a lot of these Japan International Business Club house chat rooms and stuff have a very Tokyo central sort of vibe. And I lived in Tokyo for 7 years before here, so I get that. But moving out of Japan and also traveling all around Japan, I think for me, I just wanted to add the insight that not only is like at a personal level, like whether people are comfortable or not with change. It's also a timing thing. There's different, ages and periods of time where people are more open to change and not. The other gentleman talking about being here in the late 80s, that was probably a time where everybody's really excited, they're making a lot of business, and there's a big push to move international. Then the 90s hit, people were chilling and cool, but then now, like, people seem like, also the other Japanese woman was saying how, like, it seems like people in Japan feel like they're falling off, so then there's, like, this motivation, we need to do something, we need to change again. And I think that also matters a lot on, like, a local level. Like, I think where I live in Fukuoka, and especially, like, I'm kind of outside of the city now, it's like, maybe there's not that much of a push here for that. And that's fine, because there's plenty of businesses that are doing very successful things, and we're doing international business where I'm at right now. And these people don't really have to learn English or change or anything else, as long as you can find a way to work with international people, not necessarily just work as them. I think, to me, that's what I've learned, at least, is kind of a more important thing. But I don't know if, I'm just talking from my own experience. I'm sure everybody else has other perspectives, but that's just kind of what I wanted to reflect after listening to what all of you guys are saying. Sorry for the background noise, I'm driving. Anyway, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
If I could, Maya, I'd
Please.
like to
Yes.
comment. Yeah, I think it's important to maybe highlight why it might be important for Japan to change, because there is a school of thought that is more inward-looking these days. Many young people are no longer that interested in traveling abroad because Japan is so safe and secure. They can get good employment here. And there's a trend towards what's sometimes been called the small country syndrome, inward-looking. I think that's a little bit dangerous given our current geopolitical climate, where if Japan's GDP falls too far, it becomes a weak member of, for example, the Quad nations, which is sort of tasked with maintaining the rule of law in this area. So there's some geopolitical responsibility that I think it's quite important for Japan to take on. Also, I think it's important to look at the need to change in terms of embracing work style reform, maybe more technology, becoming more productive, simply because of the declining population, and especially the declining workforce. So GDP being essentially a product of your population by your per hour working productivity, and Japan's productivity currently being stagnant, with a declining workforce, the GDP will fall if changes are not made to embrace technology and make the per hour rate more productive, which is very difficult to do, especially as the economy is moving more from manufacturing into the services sector. And this is across the board. All nations are seeing the same shift from manufacturing into a services culture. And services, by its very nature, is less productive than manufacturing. So there is a looming, as the government has identified, a looming digital cliff, the 2025 digital cliff, that Japan could potentially fall off, which I think needs to be seriously considered. And I'm done speaking.
Thank you. That's a great point. Yes, Ulrika, please go ahead.
So I think we need to be careful that we benchmark our impressions on some of these things. So, for example, if you look at the percentage, Evan, you just mentioned that the Japanese don't want to go abroad, and that's maybe true in certain parts. Sport. The United States is one of the lowest in the world. And it wasn't until you need a U.S. passport to actually go to Canada or Mexico that the rate of Americans that have a passport increased over 10%. Until then, fewer than 1 in 10 Americans actually even have a passport. And the Japanese have always traveled, right now, maybe a little less so, but there's still a lot of study abroad. There's a lot of activity, and I think if you only look at it from the Japanese perspective, then you get a sort of one-sided view. I think we have to compare these things. And I want to also, while I'm going to stop talking, why is it that Japan is so concerned about being global? I don't hear this conversation in other parts of the world. I don't hear Germans talk about, oh, we need to be more global. Or Americans, oh, we need to be more global. And then I'll stop here, but I'll just say Japan is not a small country. That is a myth. Japan is the 11th largest country in the world.
Ulrike, if I could just make one point. I think
Sure,
it
absolutely.
is thank you. I think it is very important to benchmark, as you say. And so your early data at the start of the call about the level of globalization of the U.S. population, passport holders, interest in overseas, I would say is considerably lower than that of Japan. But at the same time, the U.S. population increases. I think it's 1.6 million people every year, whereas Japan's declines. So if we're benchmarking, we need to keep that into consideration as well, that Japan has this crisis of a declining population and aging workforce, whereas the US has an aging workforce issue, but an increasing population.
Yes, thank you for that. Well, I can just give you a few figures. Yes, that as Ulrika said, the Japanese population actually doesn't travel less, it travels more. And the good point is that during the past 7 or 8 years, the number of millennials traveling overseas has been increasing. But you are right, Evan, that the number of students, Japanese students in overseas university hasn't been on the increase for a while. And probably that's something which needs to change. And finding ways to change it is the next challenge, I believe, because the society here, as you said, Japan is a country which gives you let's say a great lifestyle. Also, the perspectives of finding a good job are great as well. So yeah, definitely the motivation, for young people to go and study overseas will have to be increased. And I believe that of course this is a societal issue, it is an industrial or let's say business issue as well, an issue which the government probably will have to make some efforts to change, but it is still in the future, I believe. And let's see. And I would like to say I would like to welcome actually Karen. Thank you very much for coming up as a speaker.
Good morning, Maya. You're my very favorite person, and I can't help to just raise my hand. We're doing the conversation. Hi, everyone. Hi, world. Hi, soon-to-be friends, new friends. I have been running a consulting company for 10 years, and recently I've been helping North American, Chinese, and Korean listed companies to launch their Japanese branches. It's been very crazy. Let me give you some of my insights of what I thought about the conversation. So people who are in their 80s and 70s right now are the ones who experienced the Japan growing in the 70s. So when they become the C-level management 30 years ago, so many people now in their 50s got a chance to study overseas, to go to business schools like in US. And that was back in the 90s as the future elite people. And then we had the economic bubble burst, as everyone knows. And then they stopped providing that kind of education support in the company. So their theory back then was hire interpreters and stop sending our worker overseas and stop hiring the people who were in their 40s right now. And decided to be conservative of spending and make more steps of approving any kind of costs and escalate any kind of matters or topic to the people above, because so they don't have to make any decision, they won't lose their job. So now people in their 40s, the Generation X, reality bites, are the lost generation, or let's not think about them generation. And their know-how is not passed down to the younger generation. So in the company, usually they don't exist. So we have the 20s and 30s who enter the company learning the theory from now 50s people to be super conservative, as this is the culture of the company. You cannot easily lose your job. And from the mommy's point of view, now not the company, now from mommy's perspective, Japanese basic income is average $40,000 US right now. it is super hard to put your kids and let them go to a private school or let them go overseas and pay something like a $60,000 tuition. So that is why I think, as a mommy and as a person who survived the 90s, we're becoming super conservative. And also we're thinking about global. All the time we're talking about this. However, during the pandemic, there was a discussion. Okay, let's do not think about the Chinese coming to Japan. Let's not think about like working overseas. We can make money by doing the tourism inside Japan. If Japanese people travel to each other's like prefecture, we can make more money than just like putting a lot of effort. But it didn't work that much because like each prefecture is super conservative as well. So they tried, but I don't say it failed, but it didn't make a good result, I guess. So now Japan is switching again back to, okay, let's work with China. Or how about like Europe right now? So that's how I feel. And I'm done speaking. Sorry for the long speech.
No, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts. Yes, I agree with you about that. And well, there isn't much to say, to add to what you just said, but sorry, we have seen a failure, in the majority of companies here to actually accept, to embrace, well, let's say graduates from foreign universities. When they come back, and they actually apply for jobs and so on. That's one thing which hopefully, will change. And I agree with the reasons you gave, for so many people here talking about globalization and why Japan needs to globalize as well. Well, and we've got Fabian. Hello, Fabian.
Hi, thank you for putting me on stage. It was very interesting to hear Ulrike and Karen and Ivan stuff. I've been in Japan for more than 25 years and worked in different companies outside of Tokyo and in Tokyo. And I do agree that it changed quite a lot actually. If we look about the last 20 years, English has been a major push in most companies, but people are still very resistant to risk. And I agree with Karen on this one. We have a culture in companies of safety and not taking risk and not doing things that might be difficult for other people, so not put people in a difficult situation. And one thing that I wanted to ask is that we think about globalization as more as a Westerner thing, but for instance, in Fukuoka right now, there's a push to bring Fukuoka as some kind of a financial center for the Asia region. So they push with Korea, China, maybe some deal with Vietnam. So when we think globalization, are we just focusing on the Western side, or do we also consider the globalization with Asia area?
Well, it's not, globalization in general, it is, but Japan's globalization. So it's not just globalization in terms of Japan, getting more global or embracing the Western way of doing things, or the Asian way of doing things. It's about, being internationalized, more or less. And as Ulrike said in the beginning, I'm not sure you were among the listeners at that time. No, but Ulrike mentioned, that Japan actually, and Japanese people, they are more let's say adequate when they are compared to Asian cultures and countries. When they work and live in Asian countries, than they are when it comes to their being, in Western cultures and countries. So yes, there are different. Certainly, there are different aspects of globalization, but at the same and probably level of globalization and internationalization. So yes. Are you based in Fukuoka, Fabian? At the moment?
I'm in Tokyo now.
Oh, you're in Tokyo.
I used to be in Kumamoto for 8 years.
Yes, and so you saw that push for actually developing business relations with Korea, South Korea?
Yes.
And
Well, at the moment, my company is part of the Fukuoka push for this new fintech launch that they're trying to do with the Fukuoka government. But yeah, we are seeing that actually the regional impact, especially in Kyushu, is not so much oriented toward like English-speaking country, but more toward Chinese and Korea area of things. So it's kind of interesting. Of course, people want to go. I mean, I think they have a mythical view of Western Europe and America, but most of the business is made in the region. So it is something that we need to keep in mind.
yes, indeed. Thank you very much for that. Okay, and Paulson, good morning. Or
very good morning.
thank you
This is
very much
Paulson
for
here.
joining.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me in the speaker stage. I'm so glad to be here. And to all the wonderful people here, very, very good morning. And Japan has been one of the best country. I love Japan in every way. You know, the food and culture. I lived many, many weeks there. I traveled many times for business and I also for vacation. So I thoroughly love, and I wanted to do business in Japan. So I'm a founder and CEO of iEnergetics. It's a Singapore-based company, and I'm a Singaporean based here. So this is a global company where I expanded in many countries. We have presence in Indonesia, Philippines, and India. Now we are expanding in Africa as well. So Japan is one place where I really, really want to get into. I'm looking for partners or business who wanted to take our products. So our product is to help any business, industrial, and commercial buildings to reduce their energy consumption through AI and ML. So it's a great platform where business owners can make use of it to reduce their energy consumption up to 50%. So what I'm looking for is either partners in Japan who can help us to promote our product, or the customers who wanted to make use of our products. So if you can help me with that, guide me where I can approach. Language is of course the biggest barrier for me. So Maya or any other members, if you can assist me in my journey, that will be really, really be appreciated. Thank you so much for your help.
Thank you for that. I am sure that you can have a look at the bios of the speakers here and the people in the room, and see if some of them could be you can approach as partners. So thank you very much for that. Jason?
I would just inject a very early thought into your mind, Paulson. It's going to cost money and take time. So you talk about the language being an issue. You talk about wanting a partner. If you spend money and are okay with it taking some time, all of those things go away. You need only employ someone in a consulting sense at first, and they will find you a partner, they will engage you with a partner, they will handle all the Japanese, but it costs money. So if you have a budget for market entry, you're hoping not just to stumble across a partner who does everything on a success basis, then you have a real chance. It's a very closed industry, the electrical industry, and quite cliquey between the two major islands. But there are a lot of smaller companies that work directly with those that are probably looking to be innovative and bring to the big power companies opportunities. Or indeed, down in the smaller companies in the alternative energy front, there's a number of companies that are popping up. Perhaps there's some partnership that certainly have the same client base in mind. So lots of opportunities there, but it's going to cost money, and it'll take a lot longer than you think before you win the first deal.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you so much, Jason.
Yes. Okay. So thank you. And then Kazuya, good morning.
Good morning.
What are your thoughts?
Oh, it's just my personal obstacle and subjective view. But the theme of the generation change can be considered as a theme that require major change in social structures. The social structure of economic development is back in 1950 to 1973. And the economic stagnant has caused slackening of the mindset of resistance of change, which is impediments of adoption of new customs. There's many cases, I think, especially globalization is such a broad theme, but within the globalization focus on Japanese is particularly Western culture. Again, compare based on the Western cultures. Japanese people come across this theme. They often refer to their lifestyles. I don't know, what do you think about it? That's what I see it.
Thank you. That's an interesting perspective too. Well, globalization, internalization as a lifestyle. Certainly, okay, yes, I hadn't thought about this, but okay, we've got Fabienne again. So, anybody, would you like to share your thoughts? Yes?
Yeah, I agree with Kazuya. I think there is a divide of people that think as themselves as international people. So, as it has been said before, maybe a previous generation, people that went to study abroad, people that actually seek friends that are non-Japanese, compared to people that maybe feel like they don't want to do anything with foreigners. I mean, they just want to stay in their bubble in a way. And it could be from anywhere. As I said before, when I was in Kumamoto, there were a few people that actively sought foreign people to befriend, and maybe actually less in Tokyo because it's more common to have foreigners. But people might define themselves as internationalists or globalists and internalists. So yeah, Kazuya is a very good point.
Thank you for that. Well, and we've got Diana. Diana, good morning. Diana, can you hear us?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank you for running this. It's always a pleasure to get so many insights just while I'm commuting. So I wanted to say something earlier, but I was in the bus. I think you had the speaker David. I don't see him in the speaker list at the moment, but I really resonate with the point he made that Japan is kind of changing despite itself, and I see a parallel with actually science. You know, when you want to have a discovery in science, like a great breakthrough, it's really, really hard to plan for that. You know, when it does happen, it is chance, right? So I think David was kind of talking about how Japan is changing, and I think he noticed that there are these small deeds of individuals that are actually contributing to change, and I also think that change might be actually larger than the change that is trying to be institutionalized, if that makes sense. And I have an example here. I'm working in a national university, and on campus we have cafeteria where students can eat. There are many international students, and one restaurant is actually a halal restaurant. And the way that restaurant started, obviously it is great for all the Muslim students on campus. The way it started was that it was a personal initiative from the chef, who's an individual who has a lot of experience, cooking for Muslim diplomats, I think, or something like that, right? And he just decided he's going to help other Muslims in Japan. But the university didn't do that in a organized manner, if you know what I mean. So it is really more by chance than by kind of targeting that kind of change can happen. I think I have many other examples of this, so I very much agree with what David said.
Thank you
That's it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So if anybody has thoughts about what Diana said, and please let us know. We also have Riel. Good morning, Riel.
Good morning, everyone. I just joined the conversation in the middle, so you might have talked about a lot of things.
And if I talk again about something that's been said already, please forgive me. So I live in Nagoya and I work in the tourism industry. I must think that I absolutely think that there is a resistance to change in Japan that is, I have never seen anywhere else. Change is something scary. And I've been working in the tourism industry for 5 years now, which is not very long, maybe, to compare the business experience of everyone here. However, because of Corona, I've seen huge changes, huge changes. Things that I thought would take maybe 10 more years to go. And now, because there's no choices, things are changing and moving very, very fast. For example, 5 or 4 years ago, I had a lot of trouble to get heard by people, who hold the budgets, because most of the time they are people in their 60s, and they're very difficult to, how to say that? Oh, sorry, I'm French, and that's the morning. Convince. And especially with new ideas like outdoor tourism and sustainable tourism and experience contents and small groups. Those are things I've been talking about for a very, very long time. And recently, because of the lack of target, right? We don't have any inbound at the moment. People are kind of freaking out, and for the first time, they are starting to targeting people to make a lot more smaller target, and not only like foreigners. It's like, oh, okay, so people who like kimono, or people who like to be with their families, or people. I mean, I kind of feel like in a lot of places they are trying new things out of scarcity, if I can say so, and I shouldn't say so, but I am kind of thankful for Corona, because without this, probably those change will have taken a lot longer. And now even the government is, making funds and bids to get some more, outdoor tourism and adventure tourism, and targeting just families, or targeting just like single peoples, and it feels great, because I am finally able to have people in front of me who kind of like listen to what I have to say. Same in terms of sustainability, which is a very trendy word at the moment. And a trendy word into the tourism industry as well. I hope people will understand that it's not a trend, but still that helps me a lot. So yeah, that was my insight. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you very much for that. Well, we do agree that there is obviously a generational divide, between those who want to or who are ready to accept change and new changes anyway, and those who are not very comfortable with them. Because I would say that most of the time it's not so much that people are against change. It's more about change actually pushing them to get out of their comfort zone. And we know that there will be always people who are not willing to get out of that zone. So, but yes, Corona, this pandemic has had a lot of impacts, and some of those impacts are definitely positive ones. So let's see what happens next, because, right, tourism, sustainability, they are big issues nowadays. They are very trendy, but well, I think that this is, anyway, they are topics for different discussions, because they're very big topics too. Thank you very much for that, Riel. And then we've got Hossein. Good morning, Hossein.
Wait, very quickly, Ulrika, we were supposed to do a 1 hour session, and I think Ulrika had to run off to another meeting, so I just wanted to.
Thank you for that.
Also, just one quick comment regarding Riel's point, and also Maya. I think I understand why people say the Japanese resist change. I'd like to refine that a little bit and say, I don't think they resist change per se. I think they resist radical, what is perceived as high risk change. Because if they didn't like change, they wouldn't do Kaizen. Kaizen is incremental change, but it has less risk associated with it. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much for that clarification.
And
Yes.
just one more point. Real, you mentioned Corona, and I kind of look at Corona, I call it the microscopic black ships, because just like Commodore Perry came and shocked Japan and kind of forced them to change, they had to change because I believe they perceived there was more risk in not changing than in changing. So they had to go with that change. And I agree with Real's point that Corona has kind of functioned as that outside pressure to change, because it seems like people believe now they have to. There's a risk of not changing. That's just my opinion.
I really love the Perry comparison. I think it's very true. Yes, thank you very much.
I think, Tim, to your point, that emphasizes why I find it so helpful to think about Japan in terms of uncertainty aversion rather than risk aversion. I think if things are clear, it's not that Japan is so resistant to change per se, it's resistant to uncertainty. So if things are properly mapped out and there's a process, for example, the Kaizen process like you referred to, as long as it can be sort of planned for and the uncertainty removed, then change is possible. And we often see it happen quite quickly as long as there is a sufficient pre-planning process ahead of time.
Right. Thank you very much for that. Thank you, Evan. And well, with this, I think that we can gradually proceed, with wrapping up the conversation today and, of course, closing the room. So if you have any final thoughts or comments to share with us, Eric? Okay.
I just want to say that I've really enjoyed listening to everyone's perspective, and I just find these conversations really fascinating and thought-provoking. So thank you to everybody.
Thank you. Yuka, are you still there? Okay.
Yes. Well, yeah, I am. Thank you. Actually, it's been a great topic. So thank you, Maya, because I've been thinking, hearing everyone's opinions, and I've been thinking maybe I've been too negative, or maybe too anxious to see how Japan is proceeding. And the reason is because my business and my information source is CNBC, and then they really talk about Japan. They only talk about, of course, they're US centric, and they only talk about China and the Chinese companies. So maybe my opinion has been sort of skewed, but I'm so glad, like Deanna and then Real talked about, there has been a positive changes. So maybe, if it's not possible today, I would like to hear about, those changes happening on, on the ground level. Maybe because I am looking from outside. So yeah, so when the COVID is, settled, I need to go back to Japan. But again, thank you so much. This has been very helpful.
Thank you.
One quick comment, and this is maybe just a future topic, but a lot of people made the point that Japan is changing, but they're doing it on their own time. And I agree with that. And maybe the question is, are they changing fast enough to keep up with the rest of the world? And I don't have an answer to that, but it's something worth thinking about.
Well, with industries like software and SaaS, like Evan's in, they definitely are not changing fast enough. Maybe there's even more use of global SaaS and software by innovative or wanting to be innovative Japanese firms than there is Japanese firms inventing software or SaaS that solves problems for a global audience. But they'll get there, let's hope.
Yes, definitely. Maybe.
Me too.
Yes. Okay, Evan, any final thoughts on this?
No, just thank you for the opportunity to speak, and it's just been a fascinating experience to hear everybody's opinions. So thanks. I look forward to the next time we do this.
Yes, me too. Thank you. Okay, Jason, would you like to chime in again, or are you done?
Yeah, that's basically it for you. I'd sort of suggest be the change. Gather together or find some people like yourself who've lived overseas significantly and are interested in the subject and helping Japan, and start running rooms where you discuss it in Japanese, and see how big you can grow the rooms and how open when you ask people are to help and that sort of thing.
Well, if I do, would you be part of it, Jason? Okay. Got it. I had to try, right? Okay, well, thank you.
Definitely, yes. Okay, Diana, final thoughts? Okay, probably you're busy now. And Fabian, how about you?
Yeah, I'm new to Clubhouse, so it was very interesting. I think that's the first time I went on stage. It was very interesting for me to hear everybody's perspective and point to maybe go further with Timothy. I think we're talking about industries such as software and things, but in finance and in entertainment, actually Japan is pretty much global. I mean, working in a global stage, and there are some industries that are already there. I mean, even if we talk about like simple thing as Uniqlo, which is a success story, an international success story, but there are many other brands that also are doing very well. So there is hope. After that, can it be translated to the whole country and not just be Tokyo-centric? That's a different thing. But yeah, I think we can have many more conversation about the topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yes, we can have conversations. I'm sure that probably this conversation will have a different, let's say, different taste, maybe 6 months or 1 year, because things are, anyway, there is progress being made. Probably not as fast, not as quick as we would like it to be, but definitely there is progress. And Karen?
Oh, it was a great room. I'm so glad I joined, and thank you for having me again. Japanese people are so proud of being diligent, but if they cannot catch up the speed, I don't think they're diligent enough. They really have to catch up the speed, and it is changing. But there's a reason they're hiring me.
Definitely, yes. Thank you for that, Real.
Yes, I joined very on the last, so I'm so sad I couldn't hear everybody's story, and hopefully in the future I might join a room a little bit earlier than that. However, I really joined Jason on the fact that be the change you want to see, and start to talk with people really around you, and start to connect with people who think like you, or at least who have interesting thoughts and are able to listen to different thoughts than theirs, is a very, very big part of starting the change, and making sure it goes deep into everything. I don't think the Japanese are wrong, and I'm not like criticizing the way they've been doing things for so long, because obviously there's so many good things, and that's also why we all love Japan, right? But oh my god, there's a big bug. Sorry, on my terrace. Okay, let's go for this now. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a very nice day. Bye.
Thank you, you too. Okay, be careful with the bugs. And Hossein, final thoughts. What are your final thoughts on this conversation?
Yeah, I was, good morning everyone, first of all. I was listening quietly in the audience. I wanted to say something which was mostly covered. I don't know how much time do I have. I don't know, final thoughts means thank you, or I should really say what they think of. So, yeah, I came to Japan in 2010 to study, and I joined the University of Tokyo. At that time, 2012, 2013-14, globalization was a buzzword everywhere, and the Ministry of MEX, the Science and Technology Ministry, was, injecting a lot of money in that university with global creative leaders, global ICT management, and pushing
young engineers and professors to be creative, to bring ideas to the world, and especially focusing locally. I mean, at that time, tourism and developing rural areas was a thing. And they had teamed up people from different majors, engineering, science, and stuff to make projects. At that time, for me, it was a great opportunity to do some research I liked. And honestly, it was easy to get money for something real if you had a track record. And at that time, they also pushed a lot on English, a lot of investment in English. And I think Japan is very lucky to have such a great plans and government to push forward. But in my opinion, I spent almost 4 or 5 years in industry, mostly in startups. But I can see that most of industries are not that eager to change, especially infrastructure. I worked for transportation logistics company. We were an enterprise startup or something like that, and because we were too innovative, they actually shut down the doors and they said it doesn't help us that much. But according to, I mean, Silverhead people I had connected to, their changes behind the curtains, they're changing. And one thing Jason mentioned that startups are coming and software. Well, I saw many startups, foreign startups came here to Japan, spent a lot of money. I couldn't find any customers, but they went to China and made millions of, literally hundreds of millions of dollars with the same team, same structure and software and stuff. One thing is that, in my opinion, I'm not an expert. I haven't seen it. I mean, my experience is limited. They don't open up easily to foreign companies, especially small ones and new ones. If you're, newer than 20 years or younger than 20 years, it's not easy to sign a contract with those. And the big tech people, they're sitting in, they are the board members. They see the change, they want to change, but they're very, very risk adverse in case of if something went wrong and stuff. And they have to be very sure about the quality of the product and stuff to bring it, to the real game. And again, back to Jason's comment, in software, I studied AI and software. Not a single book, not a single library was developed. I studied, using is developed by Japanese firm, or, most of references are direct translation. Courses are the same. And it's sad to see still there isn't much enough courses about the new technology in Japanese education systems. I think it needs a huge change, and the professors maybe do not like it. If it wasn't for global online courses like Coursera, IDX and stuff, I wouldn't learn my skills so far. So I don't want to take a lot of your time. I know we're ending up. In short, they're changing because they have to change, otherwise they lose many games, which I think they've already lost some of those. And China is a big threat to most of Japanese businesses, and they are realizing that, and they are trying to do something about it, in my opinion. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope everybody will have a good day from now.
Thank you for that. Yes, I believe that this conversation we will continue it later in the future, because there is still a lot to be said. There will be a lot of new things coming up as well. So with this, let me say that I'm going to close the room in maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Next week we're having the same room, this room again. And Evan will be our guest speaker at that point. He will be talking about digitalization in Japan again. If you have time, please join us again, join the discussion, and share your thoughts with us at that point. Today, I wish you a good day. Enjoy your time, the morning, what is left of it, and the afternoon as well. In the meantime, also, before you leave the room, please have a look at the people who are here, at the bios of the people who are here. And if you think that you would like to connect with some of them, please give them a follow. Thank you very much again for this. We're looking forward to having you again next Thursday and the week after that. So with this, well, I say see you and enjoy the day. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for coming. What a great conversation and so much expertise in this room. So I really appreciate it.